Let me hit the record button, and we're ready to go. So, hello, my name is Bob Mayfield, and we're here for August Lunch and Learn with our good friend Justin Gravitt from Dayton, Ohio, coming into us from Dayton, Ohio, and we're glad everybody's here. We have some panelists that want to be with us today as well. Mike Teal is the pastor of First Baptist Church, Cameron Baptist Church in Lawton. Sean Nichols is at Wilmot Place Baptist Church in Oklahoma City, and Chris Evans is the spiritual formations pastor at First Baptist Church in Edmond. So those panelists are going to be here. We're going to have a little time here right now. We're going to start in just a moment with Justin, about 30 to 40 to an hour and a half to 3-hour presentation from Justin. Kind of depends on how wound up and sort of the spirit he gets today. And then after that, we'll have Q&A. If you're an attendee today, down there on your screen, there's a Q&A button if you want to push that, and then if you have a question, please put that over in the Q&A. The panelists and I, we will be moderating the Q&A so we can watch and kind of see what's going on, and then when Justin finishes his presentation, we'll be asking the questions that you put over there in the Q&A time. At 1 o'clock, we're going to move to basically a panel discussion forum, and our panelists are going to kind of weigh in and say, hey, here's what I've heard, and here's some things that I really need to apply to my situation and so forth, and also do some more Q&A there. We will wrap up no later than 1:30 today. So that's our plan. Let's have a word of prayer, and then Justin, if you're ready, we're going to turn it over to you, and we'll be ready to rock and roll.
Sounds great.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time together. Father, I want to pray for Justin as he shares with us as we talk about making disciples and developing a disciple-making, not just a culture, but a movement within our church. And so, Lord, that's our prayer today. Father, we're not to take any more of Justin's time, but we do value the communication, the opportunity that's constantly before us to be in community and to commune with you, our Father. So we pray that you bless this time together. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Justin, it's all yours, brother.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Well, it's good to be with you guys today. Oklahoma, man, it's fun to somewhat be in Oklahoma today, the realities of our world, but we can do that. And, I've been excited and looking forward to this because, with technology, we can be together and be with brothers and, just learn. And a little bit about my reality. I've been with pastors almost every day for the past 6 years. That's what I do is I help pastors in disciple making, and really I pastor pastors is a way that one of my pastors likes to put it. And what I help them with is disciple making predominantly. I want to give you just a little bit of background about who I am and how I got where I am today. I'm in Dayton, Ohio. Grew up not far from here, and raised in a Christian home. Sort of. So my dad took us to church every Sunday. My mom never went and was not a believer until I got to college, actually, which is a whole different story. But I didn't like going to church. It wasn't for me. Didn't like it. Wasn't interested. And then I went to college and was living the typical college life and met a girl in one of my English classes who I was infatuated with and was talking to her in class, and she invited me to something called a NAV night. And I was like, yeah, great. I had no idea what I was going to, but I knew she was wanting me to go and I'd be with her. And so I went, and it turns out to be a Navigators campus ministry meeting. And after being in church my whole life, I'd been in those settings before, so I felt comfortable. But what really stood out to me was there's a different, it just felt different there. People were really genuine and trying to find God and relating to him. In my home church, it wasn't that way growing up. And so I began to get involved, went to a Bible study. This was at the very end of my sophomore year. And I remember sitting in Bible study the first time, and the leader had the guys go around and share a verse that they'd memorized. And I was amazed that anybody my age was actually memorizing the Bible. And they knew some of it, and I'd never been around anyone like that before. And I realized that they had something I didn't have, and they had something I needed. And it was from there, actually junior year, one of the older guys began to disciple me. and radically changed my life. From Christianity being kind of a thing about rules and going to church on Sundays, whether you like it or not, and doing this and not doing these things. And, that was my experience of Christianity at that point. But he loved me well. And he helped me understand what it looked like to cultivate a relationship with Jesus. And as I look back on it, that changed me incredibly. From there, God got a hold of my life, and began to think that I would be sitting where you guys are as pastors of a church. And as I continued to move forward in my faith and prayer and discernment, I really realized that God was leading me to go on staff with a navigator. So I actually did my first couple years. I would drive through Oklahoma a fair amount because I was in Amarillo, Texas, and we planted campus ministries. Starting at West Texas A&M, I was there 2 years, so we planted one there. Amarillo College and Eastern New Mexico University as myself and a team of 3 others. And those were challenging times for me for a lot of reasons, but really rich times. Was asked to go to Miami University in Ohio and take over the campus ministry there after that. Did that for 5 years, got married in that time. And my wife and I felt a call to ministering in Asia. And so we were really in and out of Thailand for close to 15 years before we moved there to be missionaries. And we were there for 4 years, full-time missionaries on the ground, and then came back 6 years ago. I've been working with pastors and churches since then. One of the things I've learned about pastors in that time, I've learned a lot, but one of the things I've learned is that cross-denominationally, there's basic agreement on what the church is to be and do. And so there's different words that, depending on your denominational background, that people put to it. But essentially, in my words, it is make disciples, right? That's what we're to be about, make disciples of Lord Jesus Christ. And we do that to glorify God. And so ultimately, we're here to glorify him. But one of the principal ways that we do that is by making disciples. And so really encouraged that that's where our church is, right? That's what we want to do. One of the common questions I ask pastors early on is I say, well, tell me, how's it going in your church making disciples? And I've yet to have, in 6 years of talking with pastors, I've yet to have a pastor tell me, man, Justin, it's going great. We're really seeing a lot of fruit, and, we're seeing disciples made. We're seeing generations of disciples. Most commonly, I get kind of shaking their head, not going so well, or they just tell me it's not going well at all. I say, okay, well, I understand that. That's common. Well, tell me about your training that you've had in making disciples. As you were seminary, right? Some of the guys I talked to have PhDs. Tell me about the classes you've had in how to make a disciple. And again, they tell me, I haven't had any class. They didn't give us any classes on that in seminary. And honestly, at first, I was really surprised by that because, the primary job of the church to make disciples, you went to school for 3 years to learn how to be a pastor and to lead the church. And you're telling me they didn't give you one class on how to make a disciple in seminary? Nope. And that's the common experience that I've run into over and over and over again. And what I've found is that pastors want to know how to do it better. They realize that they don't have the training that they need to do it the way that, the way that they feel like God has called us to. And they're frustrated. Now, in the midst of the pandemic here, right, we're dealing with a whole host of other things of, pastors that I'm engaged with and that my colleagues are engaged with around the country with Navigators Church Ministries. We see a real weariness in pastors. As much as anything, a decision weariness. We're just tired of deciding, right? Because in the early days of the pandemic, it was huge decision after huge decision, and the decisions would only last, a week or 2, or sometimes less than that. And then we're back to the drawing board and trying to figure it out. And so, I share all that to let you know that I understand the world that you live in. I understand the challenges that you face, and I have immense respect for pastors and the work that you do. And really the thing that God has called me to is to help the church and to help pastors become excellent in developing disciples and disciple makers. through my past 20 years, I've been working with the navigators in different contexts. I've had the opportunity to have a lot of training and input into my life into how to do it, and I've had a lot of experience doing it. And as a result, I'm able to help in different ways. And honestly, it's a blessing because I've been helped a lot by pastors as well. Because as I walk and live life with pastors, you guys know it's a give and take. And so it's not just me helping them with one thing and, I have nothing in my life to work on. So it's a joy to work with pastors. So that's basic background. I work with Navigators Church Ministries now. I kind of mentioned that. Our job and what we do is exclusively we're focused on working with pastors. There's about 100 of us around the country doing it with churches and pastors and church leaders. So I'm a part of that team. I want to share a few things with you today. One of the things I want to share is some of the basic obstacles and roadblocks that pastors have in making disciples. I want to share kind of our process and how we do it, more as a jumping off point to how do we engage this topic in pastors and in churches, because our goal is not just to make disciples or disciple makers, but to make cultures of disciple making so that we will trust God that it might become a movement in that local place, right? Wherever that church is, that's what we're desiring to see. Most churches I've found fail in disciple making, not because of obstacles, but because of a clear path to a lesser goal. Let me say that again, that most churches fail in disciple making, not because of obstacles, though we will cover some of them, but because there's a clear path to a lesser goal. Another way to say that is that we don't have clarity on what the goal is in disciple making. I guess it was about a year ago at the last disciple making forum in Nashville. I was leading a workshop and had a room full of pastors and went through an exercise with them where as they came in the room, I gave them a playing card. I said, hey, hang on to this. You're going to need it. They sit down. We do an introduction. I say, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a game. This is a really important game. There will be a winner, and you should be competitive in it. And so, they're kind of getting the juices flowing for the guys. And so I said, here's what you need to do. You have 3 minutes, and you need to assemble yourselves based on your card. And so that's all I said. Didn't take questions, started the timer, put on some background music, and they're kind of looking around. And then they start to try to figure out, what are we going to do here? And so what they ended up doing was they assembled themselves based on suits of a card deck. And then I looked around the room, and I picked out the winner. I said, this guy, Mike, you're the winner. Congratulations. I had a prize for him, really did it up. And everybody else kind of looking around, like trying to figure out what Mike did differently to win this game. And so then, we talk about it, right? So I said, okay, well, Mike, congratulations. The rest of you, I'm sorry you didn't win, but, how do you feel about Mike winning? What did you see him do? And they're like, we didn't really see him do anything. Justin, I don't know. And I said, okay, well, here's the thing. Mike actually didn't do anything different, but he was the winner. And the whole point of this game is you didn't know what we were doing. You knew it was competitive, and you knew there'd be a winner. And so what happens if the goal is not clear and the rules are not clear? Then what we do is we fall back on games we've played before and hope for the best. And in the church with disciple making, we do the same thing. The goal's not clear and the rules aren't clear. And so we fall back on games we've played before and we hope for the best. When we don't have the training we need, when we don't have the examples that we can look to, then that's how we play. And in churches, what pastors typically do is they'll look over across their town. Man, they're killing it over there. I don't know how they're growing so fast. Or, it seems like some of my people are going over there. Whenever I talk to people out, they're going to that church in my neighborhood and stuff. So I got to figure out what they're doing. And I want to do that. Well, that's like what they were doing with Mike. Well, Mike, what'd he do? Next time I'm going to do that, right? And so in disciple making, if we don't have clear goals, we fall back to the games we played before and hope for the best. The games that we play in church, and I'm using that term games, but they're not. I don't want to minimize them because these things are not unimportant. But the things I'm talking about are simply preaching better sermons, finding better programs, doing outreach things in the community. I mean, it's the attractional model of church that we think, well, if we can just do that better and up the quality of that, then we will get the disciple-making results that we're looking for. And the reality is, what I've seen over 20 years, that's not the case. It doesn't work that way. So when we think about discipleship, disciple making, you probably won't hear me say discipleship very often. And the reason is it's a junk drawer term, right? It's a term that we use to cover lots of different things. And so in different churches, I ask, right, as I'm getting engaged with churches, well, tell me about what you do for disciple making now. Here, I've had answers from this scope. One is, well, we have, people that we help them with making coffee. We ask them to come in and make coffee in the mornings. And, they're telling me about their hospitality ministry. And that's their answer to their disciple making. They're like, because that really helps people, get them out there engaging with others. But really, they're just talking about their hospitality ministry. All the way to, intense Bible study. We have this intense Bible study. We have a 4-year program that we take people through. And as they get through that, then we bestow on them this name of disciple or disciple maker. And so there's all that variation in churches about what does it mean when we say discipleship. Most commonly, it's about helping a believer grow. However, when I look at Jesus, that's not what he did. And so the bias that I bring to the table, and I say this, up front, the bias that I have is that I believe that Jesus's way of making disciples was the best way of doing it. And so I also think that his way that he did it is also the example that we should follow. Over 40 times in the Gospels, Jesus said, follow me or do what I'm doing. Over 40 times. But what we often do in church is we separate the teachings of Jesus from the methods of Jesus, and we think that we're going to get the results of Jesus. My friend Jim Putman said that first, right? So we separate the teachings of Jesus from the methods of Jesus, and we believe that we're going to get the results of Jesus, but we don't. The other thing we tend to do is that we believe that education will lead to transformation. I can tell you it's not true. And I can tell you it's not true because if it was, we would all have $1 million bank accounts and six-pack abs. And I don't know about you, but my abs aren't like that. Right? But if you think about it, we all know it's not a knowledge problem of how to have six-pack abs. It's an application problem. And so in the same way, disciple making is not a problem of understanding normally, it's a problem of application. Most churches, if I ask them, what is a disciple? They cannot tell me that. They will tell me something, and that something will be aligned to Scripture in some way. But if I ask, even if I ask the 5 of you here that I'm looking at your faces, if I ask the 5 of you to write down 3 things that a disciple is, does, and believes, we would have tremendous variation in your answers. If you did that with your staff team, it's actually a good exercise to do. You're going to have tremendous variation if you haven't been intentional in developing some language and clarity around what it means when we say disciple. All right, let's do this thought experiment. I want you to think about the most famous painting in the world. The most famous painting in the world. I want you to think about it. Picture it clearly in your mind. You see it, right? You see it. And when I say the Mona Lisa, you know that's the same picture that you just pictured in your mind. Because we all know that. We have clarity around that, don't we? Now tell me, what color are her eyes? What color are the clothes that she's wearing? What's in the background? You see, unless you were like an art aficionado, most of us can't answer those questions. But a second ago, we just said that we had clarity on that. I find in disciple making, it's the same thing. It's this sort of thing that we think we have clarity on, but actually we don't. And when we start to ask questions and peel back some layers, we begin to realize that what we thought was clear is actually not clear. And that's part of the process that I help pastors with, is developing clarity around what it means to be a disciple. One definition of disciple that I really like and use frequently is a disciple is someone who follows Jesus, is being changed by Jesus, and is committed to the mission of Jesus. Off of Matthew 4:19, Jesus said, "Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Follows Jesus, is being changed by Jesus, and is committed to the mission of Jesus. These three elements of what it means to be a disciple is appropriate for the youngest disciple, the newborn believer. They can say, yeah, I'm committed, I'm doing it, I'm following Jesus, I'm being changed by him, I can see that and feel that, and I'm committed to the mission that he has for me and that he has for all of us. But it also fits the most mature believer who's been in the church and following Jesus for 60, 70, 80 years. But it also weeds out people that say, yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm committed to that mission. I'll follow, and, I want him to change me, but when you want to talk to me about going out and talking to other people or helping others, I'm not a pastor, so there's a reason for that, right? And so then we say, wait a second. We're all called to be disciples, and we can begin to help those in the church understand with more clarity what it really means to be a follower of Jesus, because we're no longer going to separate his teachings from his methods and his mission. All right, so that's a backdrop. If I can, and I can, absolutely great. So I'm going to share my screen. This is a picture of the process that we take churches through. It's called the Growing Intentional Disciple Making Cultures process. And when I start with a pastor, I start off of this page. And it drives pastors crazy because they come to me and they say, Justin, we really want to help our church with disciple making. I say, that's awesome. And then I start asking about their life. And I start asking questions like, tell me, Mike, who are you discipling right now? You discipling anyone? Now, most of the time the answer is, and there's some hemming and hawing. Sometimes they tell me, yeah, and I say, great, tell me their names. And I'll write them down while they're telling me. Not long ago, I had a pastor who had 25 people that he told me. And it took a while for him to recollect them all. And I said, man, Pastor, that's amazing. 25 people that you're discipling. And Jesus could only do 12. Whew. And I said, he had all day, every day to invest in his guys. How do you do it? And he kind of laughed and got the point. And I said, listen, I'm not trying to be hard on you, but I want to point out that we're probably talking about different things here. Because what you're saying is discipling them is probably not what I would say is discipling them. And it's probably not the same thing that Jesus did. And he said, yeah, that's true. Well, the reality is most pastors aren't discipling anyone, one-on-one or one-on-two. Some do, and some of you on this call hopefully are, right? It's okay if you're not, right? Because what I mean by that is my expectation is not that pastors are, because of what we talked about before with the training that they've had and the examples that they've had around them. But in order to have a disciple-making culture at your church, you have to be a disciple-making pastor first. And so I start with a pastor, and we'll be together for every other week is our meeting rhythm, hour and a half each session. And I'm really helping him understand what disciple making is and modeling for him a context that is very, very similar. In the midst of that, he needs to begin discipling somebody. And I'm going to help coach him and equip him to do that well. And as he does that, then I start to see transformation in him and in his heart and his language and preaching normally. And so then we say, okay, well, now I think we're ready. So let's get on the page here of this process. And the process begins with a core team. And so core team is, and I've just finished an ebook on this at discipleship.org. It's going to be publishing in November. So if you guys are tracking with them, you'll see it come out. But a core team is really a team of believers, team of disciple makers that are committed to doing this together and committed to seeing a culture develop in the church. Churches have a hard time with making teams. They don't have a hard time using the label. But what they struggle with is people coming in and relating to the team like it's a group. So there's a big difference between teams and groups, right? So to illustrate, there was a team I was helping a pastor with, and one night I was there. They meet every 2 weeks, so we're there and sitting down together, and Jane isn't there. And I looked at the rest of the team and I said, well, where's Jane? They kind of look around each other. I don't know. No, I haven't heard anything. Okay. All right. Well, so Jane's out tonight. We move forward that night. Next time we're together 2 weeks later, Jane's there. I look at Jane. Jane, it's great to see you. We missed you last time. Tell me, which one of your teammates called you and caught you up on what you missed? She just nodded. Nobody did. I said, okay. So none of your teammates cared enough that you missed last time to call you or to kind of catch you up on what you did. No. Now, why did Jane miss? Well, we find out later that Jane's niece was in town or something. She was going to be in town for a week, and Jane didn't come. So we have really everybody on this, what should be a team, is relating to what's happening as a group. They're not committed to it. They're not committed to one another. They don't respect it enough to understand that there is a difference when they don't come, and it's a difference that affects not only them, but us as well. And so teams, we really have to lean into that, because the rest of this process really is foundational. And so the title of the book is The Foundations of a Disciple-Making Culture. And that foundation is a core team. And so if we don't have a core team, then the rest of what we're going to be talking about here is probably not going to fly. And I'll circle back to that if we have some time. I'm watching the clock a little bit too, so we need to move forward. So about a year is what we spend developing this core team. Where they're meeting every other week, similar to what I did with the pastor is doing with this team. It's the pastor that's leading it. They will then begin investing in others and discipling them. As that happens, we begin to shift our focus to the culture as a whole. And so not only does the team impact by their stories, because these are not just leaders, these are everyday people that are in the church that have said they're willing to do it. Well, we get stories like, man, Jane, I've been sitting next to you for a decade probably in this church, and I can tell something's different with you. What's going on? And now Jane has opportunity to share. Well, I've been on this team, and it's really challenging me on what it means to follow Jesus, and so I'm doing it in a new way, and I'm actually helping Amanda over here, and it's been just changing my life and my relationship with God. And so we get those stories, we launch those stories into the church community. The culture begins to be shaped by the similarity of their language that comes out, the similarities of their behaviors, similarities in, or just the values and the vision that they have. In the midst of this focus circle, it's about another year, we're helping the church as a whole develop definitions and clarity around what it means to have a picture of a disciple. And so it's a little bit what I was talking about before, but if we say we want to make disciples, we need to have clarity. And the whole church needs clarity on what we're saying when we say that. And then we want to build a pathway for disciple making. And so if the picture is the destination, the pathway is the road of how are we going to get there? Somebody new comes into the church, where do they fit? Right? When we get to know them enough to know, okay, well, they're pretty new in their faith. Well, where do we help them jump into the life of the church and begin to take their steps forward as a growing disciple? Somebody's pretty mature. Where do we have them jump in to help them move towards becoming a disciple maker? And so as we do those things, then we're evaluating some different metrics than churches are normally used to. So we're looking at things like, generations. So are we seeing 3 and 4 generations of disciples? So Jane discipled Amanda. Is Amanda discipling somebody else? If she is, that's 3 generations we have there. So 3 and 4 generations. We're looking at non-Christian relationships. We're tracking service in the community, and we can track that in different ways through hours that people in the church are volunteering. And we're also looking, and this gets into the third one, the local community and the outreach, right, that we really need to be doing. Most church people, when they begin discipling, they look around in the church to who they can help. And that's an effective thing and a good thing. but it's kind of like training wheels, because when the disciples were told to go and make disciples, they didn't turn to each other and say, hey, John, would you like to get together sometime? Maybe I could help you a little bit. Peter didn't say that to him. They looked outward to all nations. And so we also have learned that if disciple making doesn't get outside the church, whatever momentum and energy we have towards disciple making there will die. It's just a matter of time. And so we really need to help the church and the people in the church understand that the vision of disciple making is really a vision for the lost and a heart for the lost. And how do we cultivate that, and how do we effectively equip people in the church to reach their neighbors, to reach their coworkers? And as they do that, then we begin to see new Christ followers coming into the church, being influenced by the disciple-making culture that's there, new leaders emerging, and then we kind of have a figure eight pattern to the ministry and the flow of life in the church. So that's kind of the big picture. I'll talk just a touch more on the leadership core, and then we can take whatever questions, because I want this to be really relevant to you guys and applicable to your context and your life. And so I imagine there's probably a fair amount of questions that have come up. But with the core team, there are 4 things I focus on in the book, and it's an acronym off of CORE. So the first one's common vision. And so if we're going to have a team, we need to have a common vision together. And the vision needs to be owned individually. That's the O, owned individually. So there are lots of things, and it goes back to group versus team, where somebody can be on that team and send out lots of signals that they're on board. They're there all the time. They're saying supportive things. But what we don't see in people like that is them actually going and applying it. And so there's things that we can look for, but each person on the team has to own the vision and has to be willing to carry it forward. And as team leaders, we have to understand how to look for those things and to have the emotional intelligence to engage those things well, so that people are heard, and so that the obstacles or the inner the things inside them that are keeping them from making application, we can walk through that with them in a loving way. And so it's common vision, owned individually, relationally resilient. So one of the big things about teams is that conflict often kills them. And pastors, some are really excellent at dealing with conflict, others are not at all. In our culture, very few are excellent at dealing with conflict. And so how do we handle that? How do we handle when team members blow off meetings? How do we handle when a team member is consistently pushing everybody else in a way that's not healthy? And so we have to handle that in a way that honors Christ, and really in a way that that demonstrates and models what it looks like to be like Jesus. And then finally, endure to the end. And so what we find is initially, and this goes for the transformation process, and I believe it applies broadly, not just to disciple making. But one of the things that we find is that the first obstacle that people need to go through is a failure to see. And so in disciple making, that's the first one I have to tackle with pastors, is we have a lot of the same words flying around and they just don't see the difference. They're like, yeah, I'm kind of doing this, and I have this small group is something that I hear a lot. Yeah, I'm discipling my small group. Okay, well, let's talk through that. So we have to help them see clearly what we're talking about, what we're saying. The second obstacle that they have to move through is a failure to move. And so you would think that as humans, once we see and understand and intellectually agree with something, that we would move to apply it. But that actually is not what we naturally do. In fact, there's a lot of obstacles that keep us from doing that, because if making disciples in the way that Jesus did is what he wants us to do, then to a pastor that's committed to programs and preaching has to confront that. And they have to confront the training that they have, or more accurately, the lack of training that they've been given. And so they have to move from a place of being very comfortable and competent at only preaching or only running programs into something where they're going to feel very incompetent and they're going to be a beginner again. And for pastors who are, looked up to, and rightfully so, respected, they haven't been a beginner in a very, very long time. And so it's a hard shift for them. And so it's failure to see, failure to move. But the last one, that's why endure to the end is there, is failure to finish. And so again, you'd think once you see the difference and you move towards it, that you would persevere until the end. But the reality is a lot of times people don't. They get tired and they just want to go back. They just want to go back to the things the way they were. And it's easy to do that when they hit a disciple-making obstacle with maybe somebody that they're working with. Maybe it's not going as well as they'd hoped. Because as beginners of anything, one thing you can expect is to make some mistakes and to not do it as well as you'd hope. And so there's ample opportunities for people to just kind of say, this must not be for me. I'm going to go back. And so the endure to the end is important. Okay, so I have 1:36, so I'm on Eastern time, but I want to stop there and take questions or allow discussion to emerge.
Yeah, Justin, I got a question. I heard you speak a lot about believers being in a team or a deeper, you call them teams. But what's your experience with? Do you allow lost people to be into your teams, to come into your teams?
So we don't, in the way that I was just sharing about. So with this, there's one team in the church. Okay, so this is a little bit different than D groups that might be launched throughout the whole church. And so really people that are going to be on this team that we're talking about, they don't have to be mature in their faith, but they do need to be a disciple of some nature. So they need to proclaim that they're a follower, and they need to be faithful, available, and teachable to what they know already.
So this is your core team to expand within the church.
Yes. Yep.
Hey, Justin, this is Sean. I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah.
There's one question that has been posted, and the question from Scott is, can we copy this page?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, what would be better if you go to the Navigators Church Ministries website, you can download it, and then you can print it out, and the quality will be there for you. So feel free to do that.
Great. I do have a separate question for you. How does evangelism fit into disciple making? I hear a lot of people trying to separate those topics. So we're evangelistic or we build disciples. So
Yeah.
How does evangelism fit into that discipleship making process?
Yes, great. So if we're not sharing our faith, we're not following Jesus, is a short way to say that. So I remember with one disciple that I was having a lot of discussion because he was very resistant on sharing his faith. We looked at Matthew 4:19. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I'll make you fishers of men. And I asked him one question. I said, well, let me ask you, if somebody is not fishing, what else can we conclude about them? And the answer is, well, they're not following. And so now we can't put a time frame on that, right? So I can't look at you guys and say, man, it's been 20 minutes and I haven't seen you guys share your faith with anybody, so you must not be following. That's not fair, right? And so, but we have to have that intention to do it. We also need to understand that if we are discipling well, then that means that those we're investing in are sharing our faith, or sharing their faith. And we cannot be discipling well if we're not sharing our faith, because we're not a model for them, right? And so even just from that standpoint, if they can't see us sharing our faith, then we're not giving them the picture of Christ that they need and that Jesus commanded us to. Philemon verse 6, I pray that they may be active in sharing their faith, that they might have a full understanding of every good thing we have in Christ. So sharing our faith also helps us understand God. I look at it kind of like a loop, right? So ideally, we're sharing our faith with non-believers, and one of them becomes a disciple. and we disciple them to the place where they are mature and where they're going out and sharing their faith. And so there I multiplied myself, right? And so it's different though. I hear a lot in the disciple making world, the circles I travel in, that they're the same. And I get why it's said, because it feels the same, but to me they're not the same, because I'm not going to go to a non-believer and open the Bible with them. Now there's some that are very close, right? There's some that are close to salvation and they're open to that, and that's a part of the evangelistic stuff that we're doing with them. But for most, that's not something they're interested in. But with my disciples, guys I'm discipling, if I'm not getting in the Word with them, I'm not discipling well. Now, the relational stuff is all very, very similar, if not the same. I'm loving them well. I'm interested in their life. I'm going to them. I'm sharing out of my life and out of my times with God. All that's, pretty much the same. But so that's kind of, I feel like they connect well. I'm still wrestling and trying to turn over a way to express it in a way that I think gets at the heart of it, which I still feel like there's a lot of muck around the two things. But at its core, again, I want to be like Jesus was, and he made disciples and he shared his faith, and that was just part of his lifestyle. So I want to have those things as part of my life as well.
Looks like we have another question from Scott. Where's he got his hand raised? Maybe the hand went away. So Justin, you come in, you work with the pastor, the senior pastor, to help develop this process, and from the time you begin to the time you end, how long is that process? I think I heard you say a year to 2 years, but how much time do you spend with that pastor alone?
Yeah, so we tell them our process is 3 years if everything goes perfectly. Normally it's somewhere between 3 and 5. I am with that pastor every other week for about an hour and a half. So that's...
Yeah, so you're developing that culture from top down to play out for the staff. And is that something that you have him do as your teams? Is it, okay, now we have the senior pastor understands what we're trying to accomplish here and replicate, multiply. And so now the staff. So does he lead the staff now? Is that the next process? And then deacons, or how do you all go about it?
Right. So it's actually not that way. So I start with the pastor, and it has to be the lead pastor for the culture to be changed, right? And I think we all get that. Sure. But from there, we don't go to the staff or the deacons or the elders. What we do is we develop this core team, and the pastor chooses who's on that team. But if we only go top down, we find that it doesn't spread in the culture. And so what we need top-down leadership from the pastor, but we also need this bottom-up, everyday people, right, that aren't in positions of leadership, getting a vision and actually doing disciple making so that they're talking about it. Because if it's only pastors and staff, then the rest of the church looks at them and says, oh, yeah, that's what they do, right? Yeah. And so we want the everyday person to really understand that this is for all of us. It's not for the special people or the spiritual elite. And so with that team, the core team's normally anywhere between 6 to 12 people. It's both genders. It's as diverse as your church is. And so, if your church has 10% African Americans, then, there should be at least one of those on that team, if possible, right? And generations, we want diverse as well as generations too, so that as they get it, and as they begin to experience Jesus in that way and experience Jesus using them, that the everyday people can see, oh, if he can do it, I could do it. There's nothing, he doesn't have any seminary training, and he's not, so that's how we do it.
Good, thanks.
So Justin, why a year? Give me your thoughts around that, because when you think about changing culture, obviously it's painfully slow. Mm-hmm. But could it not be sped up, or why do you see what hurdles do you see that makes you take that slope?
Yeah, So really it's 3 years, right? So it's the year where we're focused on, but if we're really thinking that whole 3 circles, that's the whole culture change process. But we start where we do. So it's 3 years, and it's not a program. So it's not the same in every church. Okay. So when we say 3, that's a normal general guideline. I'm with a pastor, just me and him, for about a year. Sometimes it's 9 months. I don't think it's ever been less than 7 in my personal experience, but sometimes it's 15 to 18 months. It's as long as it needs to be, either for him to quit because he's not willing to make the change that he needs to make, and I've only had 1 or 2 do that. But otherwise, as long as it needs to take for the Spirit to move and for transformation to come. There's one pastor who's one of my core leaders now in our network that, he was ready to move on. He's like, well, let's go, let's get into the church. And I said, well, listen, I want that too, but I've seen you change what you're doing, but I haven't seen it impact your heart yet. And I said, I want to talk to you about that. What do you think? Do you think that's fair? And his face kind of dropped, and he said, well, yeah, I think it is. And so, okay, so that was after 10 months we had that conversation. So we had another 4 months before we saw God do something to his heart that now has lasted. So that's just kind of what we see. There's no quick way, right? And this is a compounding interest sort of affair, right? So we're really working at multiplication. Well, with compound interest, most of the returns happen at the end, not at the beginning. And so we have to take that time to really see it play out and to move through the church.
Scott wants you to go through the core acronym again.
Yeah, sure.
On that?
Yep. So common vision. So we all need to be on the same page about what it means to be a disciple, what it means when we say we're making disciples, how do we do that, and why we're doing it as much as anything. So the why behind it. Well, the reason I'm helping churches, I haven't even touched on this. I mean, my heart is to reach the nations. That's just the way God's wired me up. And when we were overseas in Thailand, we were always trying to get people to come over and join us in nationwide searches through the Navigators Network. And we couldn't even get people for 3 months to come. And so what I began to see is that really our churches need to get healthy in a disciple-making sort of way so that we can reach the nations. We can reach our nation. I mean, where we're at, to be honest, right now. And so one of my biggest joys this month has been, I've been praying for the past 6 years that God would use what I'm doing here in Dayton to raise up missionaries to go. And after 6 years, we've had our first family leave this area and move to start ministering to Indians. And so that's the why. So we need to get same page on our vision. We need to see it. And then we need to individually own it. If we individually own it, then we will do it for the rest of our life. One team, I had them share at the end of their process. I said, well, tell me what's God done in you? One of them, he's now a friend. He said, I don't know how to characterize this, but he's in his late 50s at the time. And he said, here's all I know. He says, I want to be making disciples until the day I die. And he came out of a corporate background. And when we get it and we own it, that's our heartbeat. That's what we're going to do no matter what our job is, right? R is relationally resilient. Talked about that already with conflict and just relating and loving one another well. On teams, if we don't love our teammates well, chances are we're not going to love the people that we're trying to disciple well. And we're probably not going to love those that we're trying to reach out to very well. And then E is endure until the end. And so the end is really when we get home, right? With Jesus, is we got to keep going together and not turn back. And so, yeah, that's the core acronym.
So, Justin, when it relates to, I'm talking more about the specific teams, and there's that obedience and commitment I keep hearing from you within the groups or within the team. Within that team, when you have someone that say, "Hey, they've missed 3 times or 5 times," is that something you set up in the beginning and set that example of, "Hey, I want you to be here. You're going to commit to this, and maybe it's not time for you, or whatever it may be." Do you have a certain guideline that you set in place for those teams when they begin?
We don't have anything written, so I know there's written covenants out there. I resist those a lot. And the reason why is because I've never had a written covenant with my friend. And so if I want this to be relational, I want to model relationship. And so we talk about it, though. We say, hey, what does it look like to be committed? And one of the things that I'll normally have them talk through is, all right, so we're going to meet every 2 weeks. Let's say it's Thursday at 7 to 8:30. All right, let's just put it in our calendars now. Now, let me ask you, what happens when you get a chance to go to the Reds game? Or you get Ohio State tickets for whatever, although it wouldn't be on a Thursday. But whatever it is, your thing that you really want to go to. What should we do as a team? I'm going to the game. I don't know, But no, if we're going to honor one another in our commitment to each other, then what we need to do is to come to the team and say, hey, I know that Thursday we're supposed to have our meeting, but my neighbor invited me to go to the game. He's a non-believer, and I would really like to go because I think it would be good for our relationship, and I think it would give more opportunities down the road, and to allow the team to speak into it, because I've already made a commitment to the team, and I need to understand as a teammate that if I'm not there, it affects everybody, not just me. And so I want to invite everybody into that. So that's kind of how we talk about it and kind of process all that together. Now, invariably, there are people that will have that discussion and still do it without talking. And then we walk through that, right? If it's one time, we let it go. If it happens more than that, then the pastor's got to figure out, well, what am I going to do? Because the rest of the team is watching how the pastor leads. And so whatever you show is acceptable becomes acceptable. And so what I encourage is that, I bring it to the team. Hey, Scott has missed 3 now in the past 4 months, and we only meet twice a month. What do you think we should do, guys? How should we handle this? And so even in those discussions, I'm discipling them, showing them how do we love people, how do we model what Scripture says, but also how do we love people well in the midst of it? Well, yeah, his wife's got cancer. What do you expect, man? Right? Or whatever it is, we have to deal with reality in real life. So that's kind of how we handle it.
I've got a couple of quick questions, I think. First of all, what should a church budget if they want to partner with somebody like you?
Yep.
And then secondly, go ahead.
If you're in Dayton, Ohio, I'll work with you for free. But you're not. So for the rest of the country, it varies. Mostly it varies based on if you think of your average Sunday worship, or what it was probably before the pandemic, it would be about $1 a month per congregant is what it averages out to. So if you have a church 400, it'd probably be about $400 a month. We're not a fee-based organization. And so, honestly, I'm working with 12 churches right now. I'm not charging any of them. Now, 10 of them are in Dayton. 2 others I have personal connections to. My colleagues, a lot of them are charging on that fee structure, but they are not. If a church says, man, we really want to work with you and we're willing to do the work, but here's what we have in our budget, then there's lots of give and flexibility in that.
Okay, my second question was, thank you for that. My second question, completely unrelated. I grew up in pastoral ministry, probably like a lot of other guys who had the philosophy, if you'll sit down and shut up long enough, I'll tell you what you need to do to grow with Jesus, right? And so we're very lecture-oriented people, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some natural struggles that we in pastoral ministry are going to have to wrestle with. And I was just wondering if you had two or three of those that you run into regularly with pastors who have to get over some of their own inherent struggles, or maybe struggles you see regularly, that are something maybe we could be thinking about if we want to move or shift from being, directors to facilitators in the discipleship process?
Yeah, absolutely. Disciple making is relational, intentional, and intrusive, appropriately so. What I find is that most people are either naturally relational or naturally intentional. It doesn't always flow with introvert extrovert, but there is some correlation there. So pastors, many of them are introverts, and so they're not so great relationally, is another way to say that. And I'm one of those. I'm naturally intentional, and so I've had to work really hard at relationships and loving people and letting them in and wanting to spend time with them. And so that's a very common one for pastors. But there's other pastors who are naturally relational and love to be with people. But those are people that really struggle with being intrusive normally. A lot of them are people pleasers, and they're not very intentional a lot of times. And so with disciple making, we have to play offense and defense. There's difference between mentoring and disciple making. There's a difference between coaching and disciple making. There's a difference between friendship and disciple making. And so people that are naturally relational, they tend towards just relating and hanging out as they're doing what they're calling disciple making, but they're not seeing any reproduction. One pastor said to me, "I got no problem discipling people, Justin. The problem I have is getting them to go disciple people." Now, I hadn't thought of it at the time, but I thought, well, that's a lot like making chairs. I have no trouble making chairs. The trouble I have is when people sit down in them, right? Well, we're not really doing the job if they can't do that. And so those are the two big ones, right, that I'm normally helping pastors through is this guy intentional? And intentional guys normally are good at teaching, normally good at telling, not so good at being with and relating and walking through life with on a relational level. Or am I really good at relating, in which case I have a harder time being intentional in conversation and relationships. So a lot of what I'm doing is addressing, and we kind of got to be in the middle, and disciple making runs through our weaknesses. And that's just kind of the way it is. But those are the two and really three if you want to pull in the intrusive one that I see a whole lot. The other one I'll mention, relationships with non-believers. Many pastors don't have any, and I believe it breaks Jesus' heart. And I'll ask a pastor, tell me who your non-Christian friends are. Well, I got, my neighbor, I talked to him. And I say, well, let me ask it this way. When's the last time a non-Christian invited you to do something? Because we can't manipulate that, right? And so that's another big one that I spend a lot of time on, is we have to have a heart for those who are on their way to hell right now. So.
What would one of those hour-and-a-half sessions look like?
Are you talking about with the pastor, or which?
With the pastor or with your core team? What would it look like? Just kind of give you a general idea of what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there would be different. Okay, so one resource we do use in both is called The Ways of the Alongsider by Bill Mowry. And it's a good book. Honestly, the first time I went through it or thumbed through it, I thought, I've seen a million of these, right? Getting in the Word, prayer. I mean, it's some of the basics. But what it does really, really well is it focuses people on application, not information. And man, do we need that. So that's a good thing to do. I do a lot of writing too. I don't know how well you guys are, if you've ever been on my website, but I put out a blog bi-weekly and have for 3 years now. A couple blogs that would help you flesh out, because there's really a long answer. Creative disciple making would be one. If you Google these with my name, then they'll come up. Creative disciple making. What do I do when I disciple somebody? What should I do when I disciple someone? Disciple makers play offense and defense. So the resource, another thing is in pastors, church world, we think curriculum, we think books. Disciple making is not about that. And so I hesitate even to share that book because I don't want anyone on the call to think that, oh, I get this book and go through it and it's going to happen. Well, no, probably not. If you're a disciple maker and you understand disciple making, you can use that book or this book or any other book that's, so.
I was really more interested in the process, not necessarily just.
So the process is a lot of what I talked about, right? So we're working through, what does it mean to follow Jesus? All right, if we're core team, right at the beginning, we're going to talk about, well, what do you think today about what's it mean to be a disciple? Where do you get that from? Well, where would we look in Scripture for this? Small groups. Almost every church in America has a small group ministry. I love asking pastors, show me in the Bible where there's a small group. Like Acts 2, I'm like, not really, not what we're talking about. I mean, there are thousands there, and we have no reason to think that they're meeting, with that regularity, the same people. The only one I can get to is Jesus and his 12. Well, what was the point of that small group? And is that the same as what you guys are doing? Well, I'm not saying it has to be, but if we can't conflate small group ministry and disciple making. So basically, what we're doing together, both with the pastor one-on-one, with the team, is we're unpacking, all right, where do we get these beliefs that we have about what it means to be a disciple or make disciples? And then let's run it through Scripture and what Jesus did and told us to do. Now, all of us are contextualizing. So I don't not have a job that pays me, and I don't just wander around with 12 people following me and we don't sleep in the same place. I mean, so I'm not doing it the exact way that Jesus did it. So we're all contextualizing in some way. But what I believe is that there are principles underneath what he did. The master plan of evangelism is a standard on unpacking what those principles are. And that's what we want to try to do. And so we're trying to pull back, and then we're saying to one another, all right, well, what are we going to do? If we learn today, and the first session with the core team is essentially, if we want to make disciples, then we have to be willing to be in the lives of others. All right, well, do you know your neighbor? Do you know their names? Can you tell me one thing that they've struggled with in the past 6 months? Well, if not, you're probably not in their life. So what are you going to do about it? And so we're really pressing towards application. And we're saying, if we're going to be disciple makers, we have to be disciples first. And we're going to look at our own self. And we're going to be honest about where we fall. But we're also going to take those steps forward towards change and towards alignment with who he was and what he wants us to do. So as that happens, then we begin to look at, all right, well, then how do we help others in that? So it's really that process, right? What does it mean to be a disciple? Uncovering that. What does it mean to make disciples? And uncover that. And then eventually we're getting into culture, right? And cultures isn't even the goal. The end goal is movement. So we're going to be like Jesus. He didn't just make disciples to make disciples. He made disciples to build a movement that would change everywhere around them in every facet of society. So that's the big goal, the audacious one that we're moving towards.
Now, Justin, I heard you talk about the size of your teams when you begin.
Yep.
Did I hear it correctly? Up to 12?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. With that being said, do you find that you see a higher multiplication rate or replication rate with lower numbers versus a higher number in your teams?
No, here's the difference. And here's how we tell pastors how to decide how many. Your team's meeting every other week. You should not have any more people on that team than you can keep up with at a monthly level. So once a month, I don't care if you have 6 or you have 12, but once a month, you need to connect individually with each person on your team. Now, connect doesn't mean you have to sit down for lunch with them, but at least a 5 or 10 minute conversation. Could be after church, before church, could be on the phone, could be whatever. Just so that you're tracking with them through the process. A lot of the times they're going to, hey, this is great, really enjoying it. Sometimes, though, they're going to be like, I don't know, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm not sure about that. And that's where you have to have flexibility in your schedule to say, well, can I have lunch with you? Or can you come into the office this week? And so that's really what determines how big the teams are for each church is, Pastor, what time do you have available in your schedule to do that? On pastor's time, I'm pushing pastors to make a disciple-making tithe of their time. So, Pastor, you work 50 hours a week? What does it look like for you to give 5 to disciple-making? Focused disciple-making, right? And so, we're not using it as a junk drawer term, but, your life on life with somebody. So that's how we determine.
Yeah, because the intentionality within the group, you have to have that time, and so
right.
Know to the higher number. So.
Yeah, so we've seen pastors run teams and not take that time, and it severely impacts the number of disciple makers that come out.
It makes your job last longer.
Unfortunately, that's true. Yeah.
I think Bob has a question. I thought it looked like he was ready to talk.
Actually, I'm just moving up just to kind of say if anybody else has anything you want to ask Justin. I do know Justin's got an appointment a little later, so we don't want to keep him all afternoon. He does need to bail. So I want to offer you a graceful exit. You're ready to go. That's cool.
Well,
Justin, if you'll just hang out with us for a little bit longer, you're welcome to do that. We're going to do a little kind of in-house. Hey, this is what I heard, and so forth and so on, and might give you a chance if you want to stay to correct any misinterpretations that might have happened along the way.
Yeah, well, I forgot about our time difference. I actually moved that meeting, so I can stay with you. I'd love to do that.
Cool, good deal. Well, we've got 3 panelists on here with us: Mike Teal, Chris Evans, and Sean Nichols, and I've asked them to just be listening as we went through this webinar. And just some observations. Man, this one thing he said right here is a really good thing for my church. Or man, I'm kind of struggling over this issue right here. So I don't want this to be the Bob Mayfield show. I want the panelists to kind of run this. Actually, you guys have done a great job up to this point asking all the questions. I didn't have to ask any, so that's fantastic. Good job. But I want to give you guys a chance to kind of say, hey, this is what I heard, and maybe kind of do some reflective. You've been listening, now do some kind of reflective vocalization of what you've heard from Justin, and kind of basically what I'm looking at is how do you see this applying to you? Let's not just have this be a nice intellectual seminar. We're so glad Justin came in and did this for us, and then we go back to life as normal. What are maybe just 1 or 2 things that you see you may need to change in your church, or maybe tweak or adapt in your church to pull this off? So I'm going to be quiet and let you guys talk a little bit.
Yeah, I'll go first.
I think something that jumped out to me, Jessica. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chris. You go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to just kind of admit my brokenness on all of it. I can see why that E is endured to the end, because just in my experience, I've never really seen this done well. I've read the books. I know that there are people that do disciple making well, but knowing where to start and being willing to be humble and broken enough to go through the process for self-correction as much as for the welfare of others. Sometimes I feel like, I think that the key for me, big takeaway for me was, I feel like what we do generally is we go away, become the subject matter experts on something, say a passage of scripture, and then we stand as the authoritarian figure to declare that. And really what we're talking about is not even similar to that model. It's admitting brokenness, the need for individual growth, and asking others to come alongside with us in that journey, to be accountable to each other and partners in that process. So it really rubs against the whole pastoral mucho macho sort of mentality, right? That I've got all this figured out and you guys need to listen to me. And I don't know that the pressure so much comes from inside me as much as it does from maybe the expectations that I perceive outside of me. I don't think that's a big transition, but having people that you can walk that with, I think, would be key.
For sure. So, and that's what I think. What I've gained from this is, I feel like we do have a very strong discipleship making process here at our church. It's been going for a couple of years. For me, I'm very much a part of that here, and several people that went through that are multiplying, going overseas, and you see the fruits of all these things that's taking place. But you also now have a lot of people leaving and going across, and you're starting the process. You're bringing it back in, and not that it's not me at all. It's now they're doing it. They're taking care of. They're doing it. At the same time, I'm now back. I kind of step back and become a coach, and I'm on the guy on the side, but at the same time, balancing that and not getting tired and wore out. I want to just pour myself out. I think 24/7. I'd rather do just discipleship so much, but then I'm having to balance that and step back. And so I see what you, Sean, you're talking about from the senior pastor standpoint. I'm looking at it as a practitioner standpoint, being, hey Justin, how do I balance this? How do I balance all this discipleship that's taking place, but also home life and that? And so I'm not being poured out as much. I want to be empty, but I tell you, it's and I love discipleship. You take someone's vision out here, and it turns into here what the Great Commission is, and that's all they are. I love it, but at the same time, there is some elements that when you start to see that you now have to get back to remember why you did this, why are you doing this, remembering why you're in the game, and then also remembering my family is my first disciple. I think that's been a very hard thing for me is according to so many people, but remembering my 3 boys at home were my first disciple. And so that's something that's made me reflect on this as thinking about the process, the intentionality, but also seeing the fruits of it, but then saying, hey, at the same time, just keeping that intentionality in my own life with time and so forth. And so that's kind of what I've been thinking about as I've listened to Justin. Because Justin, you seem so you're intentional, you got this, and I'm thinking, hey, yeah, we have a lot of this, but there's this other aspect that really is a struggle.
So really, both of you, what I hear you talking about is, if we're going to do this well, then we need to be examples, right? So Paul said, 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow my example as I follow Christ. And we can't just be an example in one slice of our life, right? We have to be an example in all of it. And so that's where it's challenging, because in America, we love to chop up our life, right? And say, well, yeah, I'm doing great over here, and let's just highlight that. But man, that's where it gets real is, all right, yeah, I'm doing great in work life, and pastors can say, man, church is going great. But then when I start asking them about their personal life, when any non-Christian friends, well, wait a second. You want your plumber over there, you want him to have a ministry outside his job, right? Well, yeah. And so that's the challenge. And for me too, right? So I'm constantly pushing myself outward because I am an introvert, and it's easy for me to come home after my work duties and just focus on family and shut the rest of the world out. But that's not what Jesus wants. So I hear you. I'm saying I hear you, Chris. I can relate to that.
Chris, are you the discipleship pastor at your church? What's your role?
So I'm the executive spiritual formation. So if you take like an education minister, I'm that. I oversee everything with the staff and the church. And so yes, I do oversee the discipleship process. I also oversee small groups in our church as well.
So can you answer your question for us?
Oh, I'm sorry. Chris is the discipleship guru of Edmonds First Baptist Church. That's the best. His title just needs to say guru. He's the man.
Well, I was hoping maybe he could answer his question for us, for those of us that are young in the whole discipleship process. Since he invests his life that way, do you how do you balance that? Do you try to include your family in those discipleship engagements? Do you try to carve up dedicated time? What do you do to manage your?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I do is I do the same as I do at the church as I do at home with my kids and my wife. They're my first disciples, and so it's actually much more intimate even at times there in the home because it opens up that element too of transparency within the home that sometimes pastors' kids may not feel they can have with their dad, and they put us on maybe a platform that's unattainable. But here we are talking with them about our struggles, but also helping them to walk through theirs. And so it's created a much more intimate environment with my kids and transparency that's overflowed. And I have that same relationship with the folks, in the discipleship and so forth, and leaders here at our church. So I would say is balancing is more so just being poured out constantly because I don't want to be in the office. I'd rather be among people. I want to smell like the sheep, and so my biggest is not doing too much and having to balance. And my initiative is what I want to do more, but to remember that I'm to quit and we are to multiply to reach more people and let the leaders take over those areas. And so, and balancing and just saying, hey, this is my time with my family. This is what we're going to do, and hold to it. So that's what I try to do. I don't have it. I think none of us have it perfect, figured out, but that's how I try to approach it. Is be the same at church and the same at home because I wasn't raised in church, Sean, and I want my kids to to be in love with Christ, and not I want them to fear the Lord, not fear me. And so I try to just model that for them as much as I can.
Hey, Scott wrote a really good statement through chat. I thought maybe I'd read and give all of you guys a chance to respond to. He says, I'm not sure I'm being heard, and that's okay, Scott. I don't think you can be heard. I think the way for you to respond is just what you're doing by typing it up, so we appreciate doing that. So he says he's going to type this. Out of my 46 years in the ministry, 35 plus were at 2 churches. So longevity has fed my rationally enduring mindset. However, in my more millennial context now, the church has a hard time doing ministry for the long haul. They want microwave results. This will be my challenge. In my personal discipling, I'm fine, but the millennial church seems to want quicker metrics of success. Do you guys find that true with younger generations, like Scott says that he's finding, or not? And if so, how do you tackle that?
I'll jump right in and say the biggest disciple makers that we have in the church are some of our youngest adults, our millennials. For one, is they've been told, do as I say, not as I do, type mentality, and they're coming to the church and they want something real and authentic and transparent. So when they get in a group and they see that and feel that and experience it, you can't. It's almost like a wildfire takes place. And so I would actually say that's some of our biggest movement because also they're coming to this time, everything going on in the world, they're coming to know Christ and they're saying, I want real, I want transparent, and I see this, but also now I have handles. And I think as Justin was talking about with that application, they have handles and now they have a direction with their life. And it's not a destination mindset. And then and during that process, they're learning, hey, this is what I was saved from, this is what I was saved to, and this is my goal with my life as a whole. And so it's actually, I would say, there are some of the strongest disciple makers in our church because they want to make a difference in that area. Versus, I'm not throwing everybody in blanket statement here because someone I enjoy spending the most time with is Bob Mayfield and learning from him, who's quite a bit older than me. But at the same time, it is a harder thing for some older generation to see, hey, the missiology of the church and how it all comes together versus compartmentalize it and doing one or two things. I would say I see the millennials actually they carry the brunt of our discipleship in our church. And that's okay, that's good. Let's reach the next generation. That's how we're going to do it.
That's
Hey,
brought.
Mike.
If I could say something, I think that discipleship is a matter of the heart, and I think that that's what we have to communicate to those millennials is that it's not a program, And I think that sometimes that's they're because they've been so program driven. All of our churches have been program driven.
Mm-hmm.
And when we begin to pursue true discipleship, and discipleship stabilizes your church, but it becomes a matter of heart. And so when they're in those groups, Chris, like you're talking about, and there is that transparency and there's that openness and there's those dialogues that are going on. There's that honesty there. Sean, as you talked about the struggle with not always having all of the answers, and when they begin to see that, I think it creates an appetite for them, and and, and so I think you're going to see that they're willing to stay in it for the long haul because again there's not an end in sight. I mean, where does discipleship stop?
Right.
It doesn't stop, and it becomes a matter of the heart. I think Justin talked about the pastor. He said, that there needed to be something happen in his heart. I don't know exactly what he was referring to there, but it clicked with my heart to know, yeah. Okay, so I can recruit Justin because it's another program for my church, but that's not going to accomplish anything, and nobody's going to buy into that. Real quickly, I also, Justin, appreciated you sharing that the core group really needs to be a reflection of your church, because I've started with my staff. And before the pandemic hit, I mean, we were ready to start our D groups, and so God just said, no, maybe it was because I needed to hear you today. I don't know about that. But you really caused me to back up and to think through that, it doesn't need to be the elite team. We were talking earlier about the discipleship, the difference between discipleship and evangelism. Well, I'm an EE guy, okay? I've been at Cameron for 43 years, all right? So have gone through evangelism explosion, seen 500 people baptized in a year, and the thing that happened was we were God's gorillas, and so we were the ones that went out and did all the evangelism and things like that. And I don't think that we want to be careful that we don't present that kind of mentality in discipleship as well. So thank you for letting me share. I think discipleship has to be a matter of the heart.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, the longevity, for the millennials, your younger generations, when they grasp and see what it means to live for Christ, that is going to be your longevity. But also, you see the folks that have been in the church for 50 years, when they realize, wow, I've never made a disciple, or I was never discipled, and I want to be a part of this. Now you have some catalysts, you have some drivers that are just going to lead the way and be on your side, and seeing that cross generational or multi-generational start working together, are so beautiful. And so I would say it's not either or, it's both. It's all together. It's going to help your longevity.
Our biggest transition has been not just the people that young versus old in their expectation of the results. It's been willingness to admit that maybe we've not been effectively discipled over the course of years in church. And I think our younger generation is willing to admit that. I think our older at least in my churches that I've been a part of, our older generation is having a harder time admitting that, because there's some culpability involved, in that many of them grew up like I did. We are discipled because we sit down in church every time the doors are open and we listen, and we're really good at that. And so I think it takes that older congregation a sense of humility in themselves to say, we may not have done everything the best way, and we're open to looking at new ways to reach people and to grow people in their faith with Christ.
Sean, I think that's insightful. I run into that a lot. The older generations really have a hard time because they feel like we're telling them they haven't done it. They haven't done what they should have. And the way I handle that is I just tell them, and one guy from my church that I've known, he's known me since I was in diapers. He said, "Are you saying I've never made a disciple?" I said, No, I'm not telling you that. What I'm telling you is that I know that you've been faithful to what God has shown you every step of the way. And I think God's showing you something new now. And so the question now is, what are you going to do with this? And I said, I know you'll be faithful. And he's starting to disciple now, right? But so just to help them get through, well, it's not because you were disobedient or you didn't do something God told you to do. You were doing the best that you could and you're being faithful. Let's just keep doing it. Keep being faithful. So.
I think Scott had something here. I'm not seeing it.
I've got it in chat. You want me to read it?
Yeah, I didn't see it yet.
To use Jason's analogy, I'm seeing excitement and transparency among our young adults, but I'm not sure they're building chairs others can sit in. I'm not sure that they understand that's what's happening now is not the ultimate goal of discipleship. The goal is not an era of discipleship, but a culture. That's the common vision I'm wanting to share with them. Can I just address that? Because, man, I think one thing that I took away from Justin was just that. If they're not getting it, then really that's on me. That's part of my job, and that was really, I think, a help to me in that not only am I building the chair, but hopefully I'm building it so they can sit in it. And I think it's a discipleship process in me to learn how to help build a discipleship process in my church. And we're early in the discipleship journey. We've been going through church revitalization, so I would agree with Scott in that our revitalization effort has implicitly been talking about discipleship all along, and we've been congregationally involved, and we've met with multiple teams and different age groups and all of that stuff in our revitalization effort, but we've not been as clear that discipleship is our goal as we need to be. And so I could walk away and say, I taught them discipleship, I just didn't tell them what it was. Well, then you didn't really teach them what discipleship was, right? I would just say I think it's on me to help build that culture, starting with the team. And I love the team diagram. I posted a link to that on our chat window for those that are on the call that might be able to click on that and get a copy of that. And being transparent. I'll just end with this and then I'll shut up. But somehow I learned early in ministry that I needed to be like a secret expert. Like, don't tell people what you're going to do, just do it really well. And I find that is just such a lousy ministry model. It's like, tell people what you're doing and what your goal is and what your heart is and where you're trying to work for, and even before you're able to succeed in it. And I think going before the church, and I think this is where we that are older need to be willing to go before our church and just say, hey, God's really convicted me. We could do a better job in some areas here. And that's just like Justin said, that's not saying that you guys have been wrong or broken, but hey, we can do better. And let's talk about this together, and let's start having a dialogue, and let's gather together, and I want your ideas, and I want you to hear my ideas. And I think just being transparent enough with your congregation for us has been the first step in revitalization or anything else that we've done.
John, that's good. One of the things I've discovered in many of our revitalization efforts is we tend to focus many times on the bylaws and streamlining committees and so forth and so on, and we never really actually come up with an intentional implementation process to make disciples.
Yep.
And so I found it many times in revitalization effort And so that's one of the things, man, I'm really encouraged to hear you talk about that because part of your revitalization, I know you and I have had a little discussion about disciple making. I appreciate the fact you already have the heart for that. And so I appreciate that. Folks, it's about 1:30. Justin, I'm going to give you just a minute if you want to put a kind of tie bow on this. Go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to dismiss us, and we can go about and make disciples for the rest of the day. How's that?
Sounds great. Well, again, I appreciate being with you guys. If there's any other way I can help you, check out my website, justingravitt.com. You can contact me there. The other website, I put it up, is Navigators Church Ministries. We have people all over the country probably that are closer to you than I am that might be able to help you as well. And even if it's just bouncing a question, hey, what's your thoughts on this or that? Hit me up. I'm glad to interact with you guys and appreciate what you're doing and love sharing the time with you guys. So thank you.
Justin, thank you so much for being with us, brother. We appreciate your time. And man, I'm telling you, I've got like 5.5 pages of notes here. So
awesome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
It's been fantastic for me. And of course, one of the things I've discovered is I think we have this with the panelists. I think also with the attendees is, when you get around people that have a similar heart for something, the connections happen faster. And I'm going to just tell you guys, I went to Justin's website. I can't remember how I found Justin, but I went to his website. I read one article. I went, I like this guy. I want him to come talk to us in Oklahoma. That's how fast it happened to me. And I think many times when we get around people who have a similar mindset, a similar heart, that we to ourselves, we see that common bonding take place. And as I got to thinking about the core team, which I thought was an excellent idea, I'm the one that's been pushing to disciple your staff, Mike. That's my fault. I do think you need to disciple your staff, and I think your staff needs to go out and develop your own core team. That's what I think ought to happen. But I think Justin's idea of getting a core team of lay people, so it's not just a staff-run process, it's a church-run process. I thought that was gold. That was excellent. But I would encourage you guys, go to Justin's website. I went ahead and subscribed to it, so I get his every other week email. I got one yesterday from you, Justin.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I would encourage you to go to Justin's website. It's excellent. Very good blog there. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together, and thank you for Justin. Lord, we pray your blessings on his family and himself and his ministry. And Lord, thank you for our panelists and the folks who attended today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.